Good morning. Today's daf is Avoda Zara daf Nun Hey. We begin today's daf by thanking all our sponsors. We thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor for sponsoring all the shurim and all of the drashas as a zechus for Mesiras Tevis Ram Yisrael. We thank the Tilson family for that sponsorship. We also thank Stephen and Wendy Drazen for sponsoring all the shurim of the month of Menachem Av in honor of Israel Drazen, Dina Drazen, Stanley Rosenzweig, Zechariah Levracha, and Eileen Rosenzweig. Meretz Hashem, everyone should have the Yeshuas and the Refuas and the Chamas and which Bezeicha to Riches Yom, Neshama to Bris Nefesh Bris Agaf, and the Neshama of Stanley Rosenzweig should have an Aliyah L'Gan Eden. We also thank our Week of Learning sponsor. We thank David and Wendy Hefter for sponsoring all the shurim of this week in honor of David Hefter's 54th Bar Mitzvah anniversary. Mazel Tov David, Parshas Ekev, and also for having Daniel Hefter and Orly Olbam and Shul to celebrate their engagement, and a welcome to David's nephew, Isaac, and his wife, Gitti, and their children, Yishai, Nama, and Ora, who are visiting from Eretz Yisrael. Welcome to the United States of America. Hopefully, we'll all have the schus to go back to Eretz Yisrael together with you, the coming of Mashiach. We also thank our Daf Yomi sponsor for today. We thank Gabi and Shana Cohn for sponsoring Daf Yomi this morning in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gabi's grandmother, Clara Oxman, Chaya Bas Chaim Leib Halevi. The Shama should have an Aliyah L'Gan and the family should have a Nechama, and our learning should be a Zechus. For all those who sponsored, and all those who are here, and all those who are learning. Today's daf is daf Nun Hey. We are picking up from Nun Hey Amud Aleph, from the words Sha'al Agrippus. We're still in the middle of the Avoda to Gemara. Some challenges, some questions that were posed by certain individuals about the nature of Avoda Zara. So here, the Gemara starts off by saying, Sha'al Agrippas Sar Tzava Es Rabbi Gamliel. So Rashi points out, and we'll see that there's a contrast over here. Rashi says, Agrippas Sar Tzava, and it's the last wide line before it starts to get narrow. He says, Oved Kochavim Haya. He himself was an Oved Kochavim, and he was Memuna al Roshei HaGayasas. He was an army general. So he wasn't the Agrippus the king, he was an army general, and he had some questions. Says Rashi, he himself was an Oved Kochavim. He himself was an Akum. He served the Avoda Zara. So he asked the following question to Rabbi Gamliel. It says in your Torah, Hashem Elikecha Eish Eichla. Shem, your Lord, Eish Eichla, consumes fire. Fire will consume them. Kelkana is a god of vengeance, or a god of jealousy. The way he's understanding it is of jealousy. So he asked the following question. Agrippa had the following question. Klum, miskane el chacham b'chacham, the gibor b'gibor, v'asher b'asher. The nature of jealousy always is that people are jealous of things that they don't have, or things that are greater than them. So if you go to a person who's wise, and he looks at another person who's wiser than him, so he's going to be jealous of the person's wisdom. Or a gibor, person who's working out all the time, and he sees someone else who's much stronger than him. Or a usher, a wealthy person, he sees someone else who's more wealthy than him. It's an interesting thing, first of all, the Gemara points out that the Gemara doesn't say, Klum eskana ella b'chachma b'gibor b'ashirus. It says, first, a chacham is mekane chachma. First, a wise person. First, he owns wisdom. He himself is wise, and then he wants more wisdom. Or a gibor, a person who's strong. Then this person wants more gvura. Or an usher, a person's rich. He wants more money. It's an interesting thing that the first thing before a person even reaches a stage of jealousy is a person has to have a concept of what it is. So again, jealousy is something which seems to be born from a person having a concept of what it means to have something good, and then you'll want more. So once you have some of it, you want more. Now, that happens when it comes to chachma. There's something called kinasai from tarba chachma. So there is an advantage for a person wanting more and more chachma. However, when it comes to ashirus, gvura, also it's a very good thing to have gvura. Physical gvura, everything should be within limits. But ultimately, when it comes to ashirus, the Gemara says, Mish yesh le mana reitz masayim. Person who has the money, he wants two. It doesn't say, then the next stage is a person who has masayim, then he wants abra meir. So it's interesting. It's not like a person has a mana, he wants another 100 mana. And then you have 200 mana, then you want 300. Your aspirations constantly are doubling. So a person who only has 100, What is his hasaga? What's he thinking about? I'll take another 100. A person has 200, he doesn't even want another 100. He wants 200 more. Now, a person has arba me'os, he's not satisfied with another 200. He needs to have 800. So the more a person has, the more a person is jealous of. But ultimately here, a person, the question Agrippas asked was, why is the Kadosh Baruch Hu jealous? And again, we mentioned yesterday that it could be he's misunderstanding the pasuk, that the jealousy over here really is not a Kadosh Baruch who's jealous, but there's really more of like a vengeance towards those who serve Avoda Zara. But his question was, why is a Kadosh Baruch Hu jealous of Avoda Zara? It seems like a Kadosh Baruch Hu is jealous of something. It seems like there's something there. Just like when it comes to typical jealousy, a person who's strong will be jealous of someone who's stronger than them. So there's something there to it. There's something that the person's jealous of. So why is the Kadosh Baruch Hu jealous of Avoda Zara? Seems like there's nothing to it. If there's nothing to Avoda Zara, what's he jealous of? Amar lo, we responded to him, Em shlucha mashal amad aradoma. I'm going to give you a parable, a mashal, to help you understand this. Now this mashal, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a warning in advance. It's going to be a little bit hard for us in this generation to be able to understand such a mashal, but we'll try to get through it anyway. La'adam, to a person, shenasa isha al ishto. He's already married. He decided to take a second wife. So before Cherem Devenu Gershom, that was permissible. Now, chashuva mimena, if the second wife is better than the first one, she's more respected, she's more capable, she has a lot more ability than the first one, so then ein miskana, the first one's perfectly satisfied. You know why my husband took a second wife? Because he got someone better than me. So therefore, I'm perfectly satisfied being number two in this circumstance. Now, I don't know that that would fly over in any circumstances, anywhere, with anybody who I know. However, the Gemara says, if he goes ahead and marries a woman who is worse than her, in such a case, miskanaba. She's like, hold on a second. For this, you took a second wife? I mean, what was wrong with me that you had to take a second wife? I can understand if I'm not successful enough, if I'm not smart enough, I'm not a good enough chef, I don't think do a good enough job caring for the house. Fine, you want to get someone who does a better job than me. But you go ahead and marry a second wife and she's worse than me at all these things. In such a case, then I'm going to be jealous of that woman. So this is what his response to Gamliel said. You know, Avoda Zara, you know why Kadosh Baruch Hu is jealous of Avoda Zara? There's nothing to it. Because Baruch Hu is saying to these people, I'm married to you. We have this relationship. Everything that you need is here within me, says the Kadosh Baruch Hu. There's nothing that you need outside of this relationship. So what are you going to do? You're going to spend your time serving Avoda Zara for what? What are you trading me for? It's interesting. Now we're in the Psuk, in the Shiva Denechemta, before Tisha B'Av, we lay in the first three prakim of Yirmiyah and Haftorah. So now it switches to Yeshaya afterwards, but beforehand it's Yirmiyah. One of those psukim, I think it's in the third parak, it says, Hahemer kvodi below yoyo. In other words, the Kadosh Baruch Hu said, Yirmiyah is telling over the prophecy. I think those are the words. Hahemer kvodi below yoyo. That the Klal Yisrael, what are they doing? They switched out my honor for nothing, for absolutely nothing. They abandoned me, they left the Torah, they left what they're supposed to be doing, serving all types of other types of deities. For what? There was nothing to it. The whole thing was nothing to it. There's a lot to be said about the concept of people leaving for no reason. Just the idea of leaving Torah for no reason. I mean, when is there ever a good reason? But there was something special, like Kadosh Baruch Hu was pointing out. The Yirmiyah was prophesizing, when people leave, and they leave for nothing, there's something really painful, kaviyachal to Kadosh Baruch Hu, about that. That they left Torah, they left Yiddishkeit for absolutely nothing, they had nothing to benefit from it. In other words, it seems like sometimes there's even a limud tzchus, like, you know why a person left? A person left because things were difficult for him under these circumstances. He went to go get a better life. Now, better might be in air quotes because the person might not understand what better means. But ultimately, we could understand the motivation the person had to leave for a better life. But sometimes, says the Navi Yirmiyah, people leave for no reason. What are they going? What better are they getting on the other side of this? And this is essentially what Gamliel was telling back to Agrippas. You know, if a person leaves for something better, Kadosh Baruch Hu is not going to be jealous. Now, the reality of that doesn't exist. But if you're going to leave for Avoda Zara, for something worse, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like, this is what you left me for nothing. And that's Rahman al-Islam, a terrible thing that could even lead to the Chorban. Amar le Zunin. Now I pointed out that Rashi pointed out earlier that Agrippas was not Jewish. He was an Avoda Zara. Here says Rashi, who's Mr. Zunin? So Rashi says, Zunin Yisrael Haya. Zunin was a Jewish person. However, I would point out that the Marsha, among many others, disagree and say Zunin was not a Jewish person. Now let's see. He said to Rabbi Akiva, Amli Zunin Rabbi Akiva. Mr. Zunin said to Rabbi Akiva, Libi v'libcha yodea. Between you and I, we both know that Avodas Kochavim less be'mashasha. Has nothing to it. So again, in this discussion, I looked into it a little bit. It seems like those who say he was Jewish say, you know why? You know how we know he was Jewish? He was Jewish, obviously, because he said, Libi v'libcha yodea, Avodas Kochavim less be'mashasha. In other words, he started off by saying, you and I both know, we can acknowledge that Avodah Zarah has absolutely nothing to it. However, there are those who say exactly the opposite. When a person starts coming over to you and coddling up and saying, between you and I, let me tell you this. I once mentioned this before. When I went to go buy my first car, many years ago, to buy my first car, I went to this used car dealership, always an experience. And the individual working there was not Jewish. And he showed me this car. And it had a lot of miles on it. I remember saying to the guy, it's got a lot of miles. Like, how long should I expect this car to last? The guy puts his arm around my shoulder, and he looks at me and he says, even Hashem doesn't know how long this car is going to last. Okay? As soon as he said that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to get my Hashem advice from someone other than a used car salesman. Okay? But the idea over here is, some say actually the idea of Libi v'libcha yodea. Once someone starts telling you, you and I, we're both on the same page with this, just take a step back, make sure that you're actually on the same page, because sometimes actually you're not anywhere near the same page. But ultimately, he said, we know Avodas Kochavim has nothing to it. But I still have a question. Gavri, we see people, the azli ki mitbri, they are broken, they're physically broken, and they go to Avodah Zarah, the asu ki mitzmenti. Somehow, they walk into Avodah Zarah physically broken, they go serve Avodah Zarah, and they come back better. So this seems to be a big problem that I'm having over here. I know there's nothing to Avodah Zarah. But I also am seeing that people are actually getting results from Avodah Zarah. So my timer, what's the reason for this? Amar lo, Rabbi Akiva said back to Mr. Zunin, Amar lo em shalacha mashal. Let me give you a little parable. What's this similar to? La'adam neman shahaya be'ir. There's a person in town was a very trustworthy person, and everybody knew that this person was trustworthy. People had no problem depositing their money with him without any witness testimony. In other words, he was an old-fashioned bank. People would go there, they'd leave money with him, he'd lock it up in the safe, he'd write it down in his little notebook, and there was never a problem. A person deposited $100,000, they got it back. $50, $50,000, whatever it was that people deposited with him, he was trustworthy. Never did he deny it. Never did he come back with any confusion. He was the height of responsibility. One person, he said, you know what? I'm not that naive. I'm only gonna give this person money. I'll make my deposits with Eidim. Now, one time what happened, he got used to always depositing money with this person. One day he had to make a deposit. He didn't have any available Eidim. So what did he do? He gave the person money without any witness testimony. Now, Amar lo Ishto, his wife was his partner. And his wife said, you know what? Mr. Eidim over here, who never would make a deposit with us without Eidim, he didn't give Eidim. Guess what? Here's our opportunity. When he comes back to claim his money, just say, sorry, we never got that money from you. And what's he going to do? He's going to get his Eidim. His Eidim weren't present, and therefore, here's our opportunity to steal this guy's money. Amar Allah. Again, this is not a true story. This is just a mashal. But the guy says to his wife, because this fool gave me money without witnesses, Anu nevad es umnaseinu. Should we go ahead and lose our trust in the community? Imagine how the story is going to unfold. The person's going to say, I've deposited hundreds of thousands of dollars with this person, and I always did it with Adim, and I got it back. The one time that I went and deposited money with this guy without Adim, he immediately took advantage of me. He immediately exploited me and said, what? Money? It never happened. I've got this money, and he kept my money. Afkach, so this is the mashal. So now Rabbi Kiva says back to Zin and Afkach, Yisurim, the same thing is true when it comes to Yisurim. The time that a Kadosh Baruch Hu chooses to send Yisurim on a person, Mashpia Nosam, Kadosh Baruch Hu says to those Yisurim, to those difficulties, Shalo telchu ela biyom ploni. They're only allowed to go on a particular day. And Velo tetzu, they're only allowed to leave. Ela biyom ploni, on a particular day. Ubisha plonis, at a particular time. Vayidei ploni, through the following doctor. Vayidei sam ploni, through the following medication. In other words, Yisurim have rules as well as to when they're supposed to come and when they're supposed to leave. Now, once the time comes that they're supposed to leave, now guess what? This person decided to go ahead and enter into a house of Avoda Zara. Now the Yisurim are saying, Amru Yisurim. Yisurim say to each other, Dinhu, the truth is, the most appropriate thing for us to do is Shlo Neitze. We shouldn't leave. We're going to leave this guy who's busy serving Avoda Zara? No, you know what? We'll stay here for an extra couple of days until this guy gets out of the base of Avoda Zara. However, but ultimately they say back to themselves, because this person went to serve Avoda Zara, Anu nevat shvuasenu. Should we violate our oath that we're supposed to leave at a particular time? So therefore, what does it mean that these illnesses will be very bad, but they're trustworthy? They're very bad because they cause a person to have to deal with all the difficulties of the Yisurim, of the challenges. However, they're trustworthy with their shvuah, they're going to leave at the right time. So what was his answer? His answer, again, adding in a little bit that I saw from the Ben Yoyada, says the truth is that there is a koach hatum over here, that people can access certain information through shadim. And there's a possibility that a person could be clued in as to when these Yisurim were told to come and when they were told to leave. Now, you could try to game the system, and that's what these people did. They gamed the system by going to a base of Avoda Zara at the time that they were supposed to leave. Now, the truth is, the Yisurim, similar to this person who's guarding the money, could technically say, we could take advantage of this person. And we could say, this person is not behaving appropriately. And therefore, we'll stay an extra week. The problem is, Yisurim are not supposed to have a mind of their own. They're supposed to do what they are told. The Kadosh Baruch Hu said, go on this day and leave on that day. So even though the person's not deserving of it, and the person could be taken advantage of because of serving Avoda Zara, the bottom line is, it's time to go, even if the person doesn't deserve it. Now, a couple points about this Gemara I think is just worth noting. Maharsha points out that Kivan Shiagias Manan Latzes, a line earlier. When Yisurim are sent on a person, the Gemara says, it should only arrive on the person on a particular day. Now, it doesn't say a specific time on that day. It gives a calendar date to when they're supposed to come. It seems like it's a 24-hour period. However, when it comes to leaving, what does the Gemara say? Lo teitzu ela biyom ploni on a particular day, ubisha plonis at a particular time, v'al yedei ploni through the following doctor v'al sam. Much more specific. Why is it so specific when it's supposed to leave, but it's not so specific when it's supposed to come? So he says, because of midah tova meruba, Kadosh Baruch Hu gives as much leeway as possible on the good side. Which means, if a person's supposed to have some type of challenge, it's supposed to come on a particular day, either that challenge could start all the way at the beginning of that day, or the Yisurim, they have the autonomy to make the decision to say, you know what, we'll go when we're supposed to go, but we're going to wait until the last possible moment we can go to arrive on this person. However, when it comes to leaving, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, no autonomy. Once I say it's time to go, it's time to go. you're supposed to leave. Another thing, you see this concept of just how you're supposed to behave. The truth is pretty obvious, but sometimes people feel if someone's treating you inappropriately, that's a license to act, to respond in kind. In other words, if I'm dealing with someone who this person is not the most trustworthy person or not the nicest person, so then I don't have to be as trustworthy, or I don't have to be as kind. The idea the Gemara is pointing out over here is that the way you're supposed to act with someone is just because of just because this person has no self-control, has no moral standards, has no concept of what it means to behave like a mensch, it doesn't mean anu never es emunaseinu. I'm going to lose my own trustworthiness. I'm going to go ahead and stoop down to the level of this person, and I'm going to act like them. That's totally inappropriate. That's something which the Gemara seems to understand as a given, as an obvious, that just because your counterpart is acting in an inappropriate way, it doesn't give you the right to act that way as well. As a matter of fact, a person has to think kind of like this person who's holding onto their money. Your reputation and being a trustworthy person is the most valuable thing you can own. Now, if a person's mistreating you or treating you inappropriately, that's their problem. But do you want to sacrifice the pristine reputation that you have? You want to sacrifice what it means to be a trustworthy person? The only one who has to lose as a result of it is you. So this person acts inappropriately, that's their problem. Let them take that to the grave with them. They'll have to deal with it. But you, as a person, you want to lose your status, your reputation, your trustworthiness, your behavioral standard just because this person lost it? Obviously not. That's what the Gemara teaches us. But obviously we can't allow ourselves to fall prey to other people's negative behaviors. Amalei Rav Bar Yitzchak Rav Yehuda. Rav Bar Yitzchak said to Yehuda, Ha'ika beis avos kochavim ba'asrin. There is this Avoda Zara in our town, the chimatzrich alma lamitra, that one time there was a drought and there was no rain, and when people needed rain, mischazi lahu b'chalma, their Avoda Zara shows up to them in a dream, v'amar lahu, and it says to them, shachtu li gavra, kill the following person, or kill 8 person, human sacrifice, v'aisi mitra, once I, the Avoda Zara, receive that sacrifice of a human being, I'll send down rain. And then guess what happened? Shachtu la gavra, they actually killed a person, v'asu mitra, and it rained afterwards. So in other words, this is quite a severe theological problem. Seems like it was actually working. So Amar Lei, so he responded to him. Yehuda responded to him in an interesting way. He said, if I would be dead, lo amri lechu hamilsa, I would not be able to respond this line to you. This is a line that comes from another Gemara, and I intended to check it up before, and so I'm sorry that I didn't. There's a context to where this line comes from, so I'm not sure. It sounds very strange that a person should say, oh, good question. I'm glad that I'm not dead, that I'm able to answer you. But ultimately, he said, for the fact that I'm still here, I'm alive, I have the opportunity to be able to engage in a Torah conversation with you, now I'm able to answer this question. To Amar, Rav said, what does the pasuk mean when it says Hashem has divided this up to all the nations? Malamed shehechlikon bidvarim k'dei letardim in olam. Hechlikon could be a play on words to mean he caused them to slip. In other words, he caused them to slip with their words. V'hainu de'amar Rish Lakish. This is what Rish Lakish says. What does the pasuk mean when it says Im leleitzim hu yalit la'anavim yitenchein? If a person wants to be a fool, he wants to scorn, he wants to constantly be filled with cynicism, then no problem, hu yalit, he can go ahead and be a clown. But someone who's humble, he'll give glory. If a person ultimately, he wants to engage in dvar of tumah, of impure things, then postin lo, the door is wide open. A person who wants to make good decisions, Kadosh Baruch Hu helps you. So the simple answer was, Kadosh Baruch Hu presents scenarios that give people opportunities to make mistakes. Like we said yesterday, Kadosh Baruch Hu does not twist our arm behind our back and force us to do the right thing. The right path is in front of us. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells us what is the way to live, what's the way for a person to do vasisa yashav atov, do the right things in the ways of Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's the Torah. Torah tells you what to do. A person who wants to go ahead and engage in all kinds of negative behaviors, such as Avoda Zara, Kadosh Baruch Hu is not going to slam the door shut in front of you. And therefore, sometimes the Kadosh Baruch Hu even allows a person to slip. But a person wants They can manipulate systems to be able to make things look like things are actually working with the service of Avoda Zara. There is something called the Koach HaToma. I always point out that in the Psukim itself, we're going to learn this next week. Is it next week? By the Parsha of Navi Sheker, it says that a person will come by and he will say, he presents to you a sign or some type of miraculous thing. The Psukim themselves say, Kadosh Baruch Hu is testing you. Kadosh Baruch Hu allows Avodah Zarah to go ahead and to do these miraculous things sometimes. Not because Avodah Zarah actually has anything to it, but Avodah Zarah, sometimes a person gets swept into it. Kadosh Baruch Hu allows a person to make a mistake. Now again, one more point to point out over here. It says, Balatame, a person who wants to engage in impurity, poschen lo, the door is open. However, when it says Balataher, when it comes to a person who wants to do the right thing, what does it say? Messiah lo. Kadosh Baruch Hu helps the person. There's a very big difference between a door being open and Kadosh Baruch Hu helping. Messiah lo is holding onto your hand and helping you in. Certainly, when it comes to a person doing the right thing, Kadosh Baruch Hu is there to help. Kadosh Baruch Hu is there to hold a person's hand and to help them be successful. That's what Siyata Tishmaya is. However, when it comes to a person wanting to do the wrong thing, Kadosh Baruch Hu is not going to help a person do the wrong thing. But the door is wide open. A person wants to make a mistake. A person wants to make poor choices. The pasuk says very clearly, I've placed before you all different paths. There's a path of life, path of death. There are plenty of things that a person could do in life, good choices or bad choices. Person wants to make bad choices, Kadosh Baruch Hu is not going to slam the door shut in front of them. Person has to own those choices, own those decisions. The door will be open, but ultimately the consequences are there as well. When it comes to a person wanting to do the right thing, engage in the right thing, then that's what says Balatara Messiah lo, Kadosh Baruch Hu will help him. At this point, we are now moving on to essentially a very different topic. And I saw that there are some Rishonim who point out that the next Mishnah really should have been part of the next parak, because it starts talking about Yayin Nesach, but they didn't want to finish, the Chazal did not want to finish off a parak just with disproving of Avodah Zara. It's not a great way to end off, so they kind of brought the next parak into this parak as well. So we're switching topics now to talk about Yayin Nesach, and that's really the topic until the end of the Masechta. So the entire next parak, Asocher Sapal, you'll see, it starts off with Yayin Nesach and essentially talks about the various different halachas of Yayin Nesach, some of them quite fascinating, but now it starts off with the following introduction. Lochin, and let me just make my own introduction to this, and I apologize if my wine making skills are not 100% up to par. I think I understand what's going on here with the wine press, but if anybody was around in biblical times when they made wine from grapes and understands that they're making a mistake, I'm happy to be corrected. It seems like that a wine press had 3 different stages. Step number 1 was literally step number 1 is the old-fashioned picture that you see of a whole family taking off their socks and shoes, and they go into a bucket and they're stepping all over the grapes. That's what we'll refer to as the gas ba'uta, the place where they ultimately step and they kick the grapes around. And then there's something called a tafuach. A tafuach seems to be a place where it is more finely pressed by actually putting it under like a beam that squeezes it out, and then it rolls through some tube into a place called a bar, to the cistern or the pit where it would sit. Now the bar, if you've gone to some places, sometimes in Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, they have these old ancient wine pits where it seems like they would allow the wine to probably cool inside the ground. It was literally some kind of pit in the ground, which Rashi says they would put sid or lime around it, so it would make it waterproof. That's where the wine would sit. So it seems like there's 3 stages in the pressing. Number 1 is the toe part, the old-fashioned athlete's foot part of the wine, and then there's the other part of wine where they squeeze it with the wine press, and then it goes down into the bar. So now this is what the Mishnah says: Lokhin gas beuta min ovid kochavim. You're allowed to buy a wine press that is already beuta, that's already stepped on by an ovid kochavim. So this is step number 1. They take the grapes, they put it into this massive vat, They fill it all the way up to the top, and then they start stepping on it, and it's full, and they're able to seal it, and they could sell a pressed bunch of grapes, of wine grapes. They're already pressed. You're allowed to buy that from an Oved Kechavim. Afal pi shehu nosein biyado v'nosein l'tafuach. Even though the akum takes his hands, he puts his hands in there, and he transfers these grapes into the tafuach, which is the next step of the process, where they squeeze it in a more refined way. So this is why I'm pointing out that there are these two stages here, because it's not just that the wine goes from some type of track into the next place, because clearly he's picking up all the sediment and re-squeezing it again. So it's squeezed the first time, and then it goes back into another press. Ve'eno osa yayin nesach. Here's the rule: it does not become yayin nesach ad sheyerid lebar, until it goes ultimately into the bar at the end of the process. And then the Mishnah says, Masha babar asar bashar mutter. Whatever is inside the bar, that's yayin nesach, but the rest of it's going to be mutter. Now remember, there are really two different things to keep in mind. Yayin nesach means wine that was poured as a libation to Avoda Zara, and there's something else which you often refer to as yayin nesach, which is called stam yenam, which is a gezeras chazal that all wine that's handled by an akum is asur. Even if we don't know that he used it for Avodah Zarah, stam yenam is going to be a problem. So what our Mishnah seems to teach us over here is that, number one, there's no problem of buying the grapes or the wine from the akum in the initial stage, because before the wine ends up in the bar, that last stage where it's wine starting to ferment, at that point in time, that's not yayin nesach yet. There's no problem with yayin nesach. It's only once it goes into that bar. Now, what we're going to discuss soon in the Gemara is the concept of hamshacha, which is the bottom of all of these stages was a sloped floor. In other words, the bottom of the first vat was sloped. It's like this: the wine that was being squeezed out of the grapes would float to the bottom, and then there was some type of opening where all the wine is able to pour out and to be transferred to the bar. So that wine that comes out at that stage, the hamshacha that starts to slide down inside that stage of the wine press, that's not yayin nesach yet. It's only yayin nesach inside the bar. We're going to see this is subject to a machlokes in our Gemara. Next part of the Mishnah: Darchim im ha'oved kechavim begas. If the oved kechavim hires you or any Yisrael to help him step on the grapes, it's going to be permissible. Now this is a loaded line. Look at the last Rashi before you turn the page to Nun Hey Yom Beis. Last Rashi, Nun Hey Yom Aleph. He explains that there are three potential problems that could happen with a person stepping on the grapes. Number one, it's permissible to step on the grapes because v'lo amrinon mistaker be'isuri hanahu. Number one, if there's yayin nesach over here, you're not allowed to get paid from an akum to work with isuri hana. If the wine over here is forbidden to benefit from, then you're not allowed to take a job working with it. So number one, you're allowed to step on it, as we got finished saying, because at this stage, it's not yayin nesach yet, so it's not isuri hana. There's another potential problem. And he says, you're even allowed to drink the wine at this point in time. Now, umishum gorim tuma. How about the fact that the akum is tamei, and we're talking about a place where he's ultimately been he is causing all these fruits to become tamei. What does that mean? That means that the assumption is that he's not tahar. The grapes do not become tamei until they get wet. So if you take a bunch of dry grapes, you put it into a vat, and then you start stepping on it, at that point in time, then they are mukhshar lekabel tuma, and now they're going to become tamei as a result of the two of you guys stepping on these grapes. So therefore, mishum gorim tuma leka. There's no problem of causing tuma here. Why? Shemisha shedarach behen over kechavim ma'at nitmu. The second he touches them, they already became tamei. So in other words, you're not having anything to do with them becoming tamei. They become tamei the moment he himself jumped into this vat of wine. Now, umishum misayeye de ovri avera. You might ask, but there's a third stage here. Even though you're not actually causing it, but there's a misayeh, you're helping an akum do something wrong by making something tamei. The answer is he's not doing anything wrong. Leka waisha over kechavim lo nitztava kach. There is no there is no avera for an akum to make something tamei. It's not one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach that says that an akum is not allowed to make grapes tamei. So therefore, you're allowed to step on these grapes together with him. There's no problem of benefiting from yayin esach because it's not yayin esach yet. There's no problem of causing tumah to come because they're tamei anyway, and there's no problem of misayeya yidei over avera because the akum is not an over avera. However, the Mishnah says of a little botzun imo, you can't cut the grapes off of the vine with him because if you look at Rashi, then indeed in that problem there is a problem. Look at Rashi at the top of the page. Lo botzun lefisha nostnin begat tmeya v'gorim tumahu. In this case, the grapes would not otherwise become tamei. It's only because you're helping him get them into that vat that they become tamei. Next part of the Mishnah. Yisrael shehu osa betuma lo darkin v'lo botzunim. If the same exact person who was making wine was not an akum, but was a Yisrael, and he's doing a betuma, then there is a problem. You cannot go ahead and step on the grapes with him. V'lo botzunim, you can't either cut it off with him. Why? Because in those cases, you are a Messiah de over Avera. There is a problem for Yisrael to take chulin and make them tamei in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore you helping him do that is a problem. Aval molichin imo chavios lagas. Once he already produced wine, which is tamei, at that point in time, if he hires you to help him schlep his barrels to his wine press to catch the wine, there's no problem to do that. You're allowed to do that because again, you're allowed to help a person move wine, which is tamei. Umevi'in imo minagas. You're allowed to help him schlep the full barrels back into the wine cellar. Similarly, nachtom, a baker shu osa b'tuma, he's baking bread with tuma, lo lashin v'lo arche. You can't help him knead it or to set up the shapes of those loaves of bread because you're helping him spread tuma to all those loaves of bread. Avo molichin imo pas the palter. You're allowed to help him carry the unbaked loaves of bread to the oven. It's machlokes between Rashi and Tosafos what this means. We're going with Rashi that lepalter means to the oven. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, yayin, wine, kivin shehischel mashech. Once it starts to flow downwards, like we described, the bottom of these vats have a sloped floor. It's like this, all the wine will gather in one place and go out of kind of like a funnel. Once it starts to slope downwards, osa yayin esach, it becomes yayin esach. Clearly, Rav Huna is saying something different than our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that it's only when it goes into the bar. Rav Huna says once it starts to slope down inside the vat, it becomes yayin esach. The Gemara says, hold on, Tanan. Our Mishnah just said, Lokhin gas b'utamanova kachavim. You're allowed to buy this gas that's already stepped on from the Avoda Zara, from the akum. V'afal pi shenotan b'yado shenotan v'afal pi shenotel b'yado. He takes it in his hand and notel tafuach. He takes it in his hand, he puts it into the other part of the press. Clearly, our Mishnah says it does not become yayin esach at that stage. Amar Rav Huna begas pekuka omuleya. No, our Mishnah is talking about a case where the floor of the gas is plugged up. The cork is in at the bottom, so the wine is not flowing because it's also full. In other words, it's completely full with these grapes, and it's plugged in at the bottom, so there's no wiggle room. There's no place for it to go. So our Mishnah is talking about a case where it's not flowing from the top to the bottom, and that's why it's not a problem. Tashamat tries to bring a raya. It says, "Ve'eno osa yayin esach ad sheyerid lebar." Our Mishnah couldn't have been more clear. It says, it does not become yayin esach until the wine goes to the final stage where it's in the bar, in the ground, where it's ready wine. That's also talking about it does not become yayin esach until it goes into the bar. You know why? Because it can't get from this original vat into the bar, into the receiving pit where it's supposed to be, because it's all clogged up. That's why it does not become yayin esach. But if it was open and the process allowed it to flow from the top into the bottom, it would become yayin esach once it starts to go. All right. Tashema, Yorad Labar. It says it goes down into this bar, to this receiving pit. Ma sheba bar aser. What's in the bar is aser. V'hashar mutter, and the rest is mutter. In other words, my dear friend, says the Gemara, this can't be even. Up until now, you came up with these answers, but it says very clearly, if you're allowing it to flow into the bar, what's in the receiving pit in the bar is going to be a problem, but everything else above there is mutter. Clearly, what's flowing inside the original vat is not a problem. Amar Rav Huna lo kasha. You're right. This is not a kasha because kan b'mishnah rishona, kan b'mishnah achrona. There has been a change between the two different mishnayos and how we learn this. Titania. So we'll just learn this quickly because it really gets started today, but it continues tomorrow. But we'll start now. Titania, where it says in the Brisa, barishona initially hayu omrim badad. We gave this acronym of badad. Now, what does badad mean? So we'll see. The Gemara is going to explain. The first base is ein botzrin in Oved Kechavim. You can't go ahead and cut the grapes off of the vine with an akum. Ein botzrin Oved Kechavim bagas she'asu ligrum tuma lechulin. You can't go ahead and harvest. I'm not sure if harvest is the right word, but I guess harvest the grapes off of the vine because you're causing him to make them tamei. Even though it's chulin in Eretz Yisrael. It's chulin, it's not stuff which belongs to the base of Mikdash, it's chulin, but still to cause unnecessary tumah is a problem. The ein darchim, so that's the second dalid. The ein darchim im Yisrael. You can't go ahead, like our Mishnah says, to go ahead and step on these grapes with a Yisrael. Why? Sha'osa peirosa b'tumah. He's making these fruits with tumah. Sha'osa l'sayeh yidei over avera. He's causing tumah for no reason, so you can't assist a Yisrael to spread more tumah. Aval, the last dalid, which is the last dalid of badad, which is avol darchim im ha'oved kechavim begas v'lo chashinan l'drav huna. We're not worried about Rav Huna. So clearly, the original way of learning was badad, like our Mishnah, which is not worried about Rav Huna, and we're not concerned that there's a problem of stepping on the grapes together with the akum. Because at that stage it's not Yayin Nesach yet, it only becomes Yayin Nesach later. V'chazru lomar. Later on they changed their mind and they said dabad. It's really, if you look at the Bach, it's really dabav. Dalad beis, which is the first dalad is ein darchem ima akum begas mishun Rav Huna. Not like our Mishnah. You're not allowed to go ahead and trample on these grapes inside this vat, inside this this container with an akum. Why? Because we're worried about Rav Huna. What does Rav Huna say? At the time of the hamshacha, once the wine starts to flow down that sloped floor, at that point in time, it's already yayin esef. So even in the original stepping vat that they're in, where they're causing the grapes to give off their very first element of wine, of grape juice, once it starts to flow from the top of that slope to the bottom, it becomes yayin esech, and therefore you can't do it together with the akum because you're going to be benefiting from yayin esech. Shundra of Huna, top of Nunvav Amud Aleph, the ein botzrin im Yisrael. You can't go ahead and do betzira to cut the grapes off of the vine. Why she'osa peirosa betuma? Like we mentioned a few times, to help a Yisrael cause tumah is a problem. V'kol shekain, and certainly she'ein darchen avol, that you're not allowed to go ahead and step on them together. Avol botzrim, but the second base, the bav, the avol botzrim ma'akum begas, you're allowed to go ahead and cut off the grapes with an Oved Kechavim in the gas. Shemutter ligrum tumah lechulon sh'beretz Yisrael. In this opinion, there's no problem to cause tumah on chulin and Eretz Yisrael, and therefore you're allowed to go ahead and cut off the grapes with the akum. You can't step on them because the Rav Huna says it causes yayin nesach and you're benefiting from yayin nesach, but you are allowed to cut them off of the vine because he's of the opinion that it's permissible to go ahead and cause tumah. So a few different topics mixed together, but ultimately the topic that's relevant to us right now is on the point of hamshacha. Is there an issue of the wine in the original, I don't know what it's called, I guess vat or container that they put the grapes in, and you start to step on it and the wine starts to come out of the grapes? Does it turn yayin nesach when it starts to slope down that slope, or only in the bar? Our mission indicates it's only inside that receiving pit. Rav Huna says it's even inside the original vat where they start to step and it starts to flow down. We will stop here for today. Have a wonderful day.